Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Paulina Kolata, and I am currently trying to move countries to start a postdoctoral contract at Lund University in Sweden. And I am really grateful to the organizers for the opportunity to participate in the conference by recording this video. And I'd like to apologize for any potential disruption it will cause. I will be sure to join the discussions whilst in transit. I've really enjoyed reading everyone's contributions, and thank you to everyone who read my paper. I really look forward to the conversation. So for a little bit of context, in my work, I explore the religious, economic, and social impact of depopulation and demographic aging in Buddhist temple communities in regional Japan. During my doctorate, I spent 12 months doing ethnographic fieldwork in Hiroshima Prefecture, where I documented the role of Buddhist actors in community preservation and the role that Buddhist temple networks play in shaping people's responses to demographic and religious crises. In the process, I became interested in the materiality of such networks, the memory and the local and also the universal Buddhist heritage it constitutes, as well as the value in its preservation and its decline. So I have been interested not only in what constitutes Buddhist temple communities, but also how such communities are developed, maintained, and how they also decay via the socio-religious networks of belonging that support them. So I look at Buddhist temples in the material and non-material, the imagined form, as active agents in that process of belonging. And heritage involves various processes of value making, and those processes are intrinsically linked to the local and translocal politics of belonging. But the value that I'm interested in here in particular is the one involved in practices of decline and decay, which cannot be controlled. And I draw here on the processual notions of value making, kind of building here on David Graeber's understanding of value and that kind of relational process of value making. So I would argue that such practices still produce value, those practices of decline, if you will. And therefore, they render objects and other practices and sites as significant, and perhaps the significance is even greater because they involve practices of abandonment and production of waste by dealing with material excess of Buddhist practice and individual memory care responsibilities. But both, however, I would insist, are morally and spiritually implicated and constitute a threat to continuity they attempt to ensure. So by looking at Buddhist temples as storehouses of excess, I would like to explore the tension between continuity and neglect involved in individual and collective heritage care. So in my presentation today, I will draw on a different example than I presented in my paper. And I focus on what you are seeing here, which is Ohaka no Haka, which is the gravesite of graves, which is located at Fudoin Temple in Fukuyama City in Hiroshima Prefecture. And Kakudo Mishima, who's the head priest of the temple, since 2001 has started developing a 10,000 square meter site that you can see here, which accepts donations of family Buddhist graves and altars that are no longer used or people want to discontinue using. So it is a site that deals with the excess of death-related material heritage, and the Buddhist graves and altars are usually inherited from generation to generation along the patrilineal lines, but as younger generations tend to dwell in urban settings, they are often unable or unwilling to take into their care the elaborate butsudan of their parents or grandparents or the remotely placed family graves. And just to give you a little bit of an understanding what I mean by elaborate Buddhist altar, this is an example of that, and kind of the space that it might occupy within a family home. But equally often enough, as was the case for many of my elderly interlocutors in Hiroshima Prefecture, the next generation is often also not there, not just spiritually or emotionally, They are not prepared to care for the familial or the local Buddhist heritage, but they are physically absent because often enough their parents outlived them. And there is just no next of kin to take on that responsibility of care or responsibility of practice. So with inheriting Buddhist ritual care for the dead comes not only the care for the associated material culture, but also the ritual care responsibilities and continuous cultivation of karmic ties, which involves regular monetary donations to Buddhist professionals to sustain this care. And during my time at the temple, it was not an unusual occurrence when in the middle of the night we had a car stop outside of the temple courtyard, and by the time we made it outside, we found no one but an abandoned Buddhist altar just left there in the middle of the grounds. Or a person would sometimes bring in a Buddhist statue that they found in their parents' or grandparents' house during the clear out and felt unable to just throw it away, but knew that temple would be the place where such items could be dealt with, involving appropriate ritual care of disposal, or could just be homed there. Like in the case of the propeller discussed in my draft paper, and I just wanted to bring it here. You can see it right in the corner of the photograph here, whilst the parishioners of the local temple are involved in cleaning of the ornaments at the temple. But these examples really represent a broader trend of how religious communities in contemporary Japan have been transformed by demographic changes, epitomized in recent years by the materiality of abandoned households, ghost villages, and the phenomenon of lonely deaths. And here, hyper-aging, low birth rates, and rural to urban migration have revealed the fragility of Buddhist temple economies, reliant on traditional kin-based religious affiliations, where Buddhist practice is often predicated upon this intergenerational bequeathment of ritual responsibilities, and Buddhist objects like family Buddhist altars, graves, and other ritual paraphernalia used in memorial care for the dead. And this kin-based affective model fuels the Buddhist circular economy designed to generate, to circulate, and to accumulate religious and karmic value through practices of giving and kind of passing on, if you will, but also giving in monetary terms to the local temple. So such practices are therefore a bedrock of Buddhist economies in Japan, which habitually involve donations of money or food, and they demonstrate both the support, but also it's a sign of nurturing karmic connections. So excessive accumulation of such offerings often results in production of waste, whether it's intentional or not. And at the same time, disarranged family structures can lead to the abandonment of Buddhist practice and materials. So local temples are now facing an ever-increased number of requests to assist with the disposal of sacred objects and emotionally charged items, including the ritual care and storage of ashes. So cases of Buddhist altars left abandoned anonymously at night within temple grounds are also proliferating. Since Buddhist temples are seen as places where such abandonment and material access can be handled meaningfully, they increasingly face the moral and the practical dilemma of managing such gifts, which constitute people's individual, family, and local heritage histories. So choosing a Buddhist temple as a site of offering and sometimes abandonment of Buddhist objects has moral implications. So Buddhist gifts are not only material, they contain spiritual and emotional potential, even when deemed unwanted. So if they are mistreated, they can become dangerous and need to be handled carefully through ritual action. And I really recommend here the work of Hannah Gold on Butsudan. In Japanese context, but such objects also become the moral responsibility of the receiving party, requiring ritual intervention to retain their karmic value. So abandonment and access can thus become sources of material and emotional pollution, but they can also be fruitfully reinvested into stimulating Buddhist systems of belonging. So by recounting the story of Ohaka no Haka and also the other objects, I want to argue that temples are being imagined metaphorically and materially as sites where religious materiality and memory of thereof is dealt with in meaningful ways and where an accounted for excess of human memory is stored. However, I also propose that moral choices people make around entrusting or abandoning things at local Buddhist temples is not a sign of naive hope that Buddhist temples will survive against all odds, even when they will become economically non-viable. It is more about the promise and trust and endurance of Buddhist heritage, which is more collective rather than individual. And the promise seems to be enough. In a way, lay Buddhists are making a choice to transform their individual material histories into matters of communal concern. So the temple custodians become potential caretakers of heritage destined to be forgotten or destined to become waste. And this is something that I'm still grappling with, but I'm really looking forward to the conversation with everyone and kind of exploring some of these tensions between abandonment, neglect, but also the processes of value making. Thank you very much for listening and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Made since the 1980s to transform several 10th century ruins into heritage sites have been sporadic and ambivalent. Festivals featuring traditional dancers, and I put that in quotes, have met with some success, although these mostly involve people living close by. And even while holding such events under the banner of culture, government organizers downplay the deeply significant otherworldly elements that give these events meaning. Yet for many Pembans, it is these very otherworldly or second worldly or virtual elements and their principal agents, Jinns, that are central to the Swahili concept of urithi, the Swahili term adopted by international actors, including UNESCO, to speak of heritage in Zanzibar. When most Pembans speak of urithi, they speak of heritage and legacy in the context of the kin group, referring to the predispositions, knowledges, skills, properties, relationships, and possessions that people inherit from the dead. A crucial legacy is relationships with jinns, which often constitute human beings in the visible, lived world. And while jinns might seem intangible, as Pembans say, a jinn cannot be seen, they are palpable and locatable. And further, in a complication that interests me very much, jinns also inherit. For when their host dies, jinns gain rights to a descendant through whom they then express themselves. Thus, jinns and humans in Pemba inherit one another. Starting from the concept of urithi, I'm wondering today what it means to take jinns seriously as historical actors with an urgent stake in debates about heritage, humans' heritage as well as their own. In anthropology, jinns are increasingly treated as imaginal beings who should be considered agents, even as opinionated historical actors themselves. Strawn has suggested that at projects at Middle Eastern ruins, archaeologists should inquire into the role of jinns who live in such places, as well as government staff. Would acknowledging the unseen as a creative force in the heritage process, he asks, be compelling for the stories we can tell, and as an ethical stance, a humility in the face of the potentially unknown? Pemban ruins are certainly full of jinns, but jinns are also everywhere else, associated with families across all categories of descent. As one woman said to me, they're born, they fall in love, they marry, they have children, they get sick and die. They have things they like and don't like. Aren't they just like human beings? And as so many say, they're here and we live with them. Pemba is known as a place of powerful mystical healing, uganga, to which jinns are fundamental. In the past, some say, jinns ruled the island. Local spirits had been there for centuries. Then, a huge population of misbehaving jinns is said to have been banished there by King Solomon himself. Over the centuries, other jinns arrived from the Arabian Peninsula, as well as the continental hinterland, and more arrive today. The constellation of Jinns operating in Pemba thus encodes the complex flow of people, ideas, and faiths that have shaped this region. Jinns reside in or occupy the landscape. Their presence influences the flow of persons. Here, some pass unharmed. There, strangers mustn't walk after Maghrib. Unknown children will be swallowed. Pregnant women will miscarry. Land that might seem empty, in fact, teems with Jinns who must not be inconvenienced. Jinns also feature in local history. Important people have prayed with and deployed them. And accounts of contests between villages feature competitions between the Jinns of each side. Oral history suggests that from the late 19th to the mid-20th century, human relationships with Jinns, while always ambiguous, were relatively stable. But since the mid-1900s, people say dramatic change has come. In 2018, I was struck by how many people said Jinn trouble was increasing. They've overpowered us, they said, we can't deal with them. I had never heard of such a relentless intensification of Jinn problems, and the Jinn seem to be completely out of control. One reason for the rise in Jinn attacks is that the landscape is undergoing dramatic transformation. Although most people remain forest dependent, deforestation due to population pressure and growing demand for cleared land have been noted since at least the 1990s. Global warming, soil depletion, the commodification of natural products, and ongoing construction put pressures on the environment. Uncultivated land is shrinking, family compounds grow, and so humans increasingly compete with Jinns for space. And this is one reason behind the intensity of their attacks. Another is that relations with inherited Jinns have always required capital. Different Jinns require different gifts from their human hosts. Rosewater, saffron ink, dates, bananas, chickens, goats, or cows, and still others demand ngoma, ritual events lasting several days, and these things are expensive. The 1964 Zanzibar revolution ushered in a transformation of the country's economy, with particularly widespread poverty in Pemba, a condition that obtains to this day. Poverty makes it very difficult to uphold contracts made with Jinns, as these contracts do not expire. Over 2 decades, I've met numerous people across social categories suffering from now untenable relations with Jinns contracted by their ancestors long before the revolution. Their families can no longer afford the contracts. Jinns don't take humans' increasing control of the landscape or their indebtedness lightly. They are newly irritable and vicious, sometimes punishing entire villages. In 2018, a neighborhood of about 20 houses suffered in this way. The resident Jinns were the kind requiring ngoma, but people couldn't afford to hold one. Inheritors became possessed at all hours. Locked storerooms were found ransacked. Goat droppings on courtyard floors where no goat had been in daylight. The troubles lasted for weeks until people from the surrounding villages and the ward's central town chipped in to hire a ritual expert and hold ngoma with good music and food enough for humans and Jinns. Things went back to normal, but the peace was uneasy because eventually the angry creditors would come again. A third pressure on Jinns comes from contemporary Islamic revival, which, while internally diverse in Pemba, often recasts long-standing practices as un-Islamic. Among the practices revivalists seek to expunge is uganga and its entanglement with Jinns. Jinns are fundamental to human agency in Pemba, and it is their inheritors, as well as ritual experts, the waganga, who embody, negotiate with, and deploy their powers. Something I find really interesting and that I want to emphasize is that the healing arts in Pemba and across the Swahili coast, and I think in many other parts of the world, are not human in origin. It is Jinns who know, Jinns who teach people what to do, and Jinns who every generation transmit their heritage to human beings that they themselves have inherited. Traditional uganga in Pemba is nothing without Jinns. For revivalists, dealing with Jinns is sacrilege, granting power to a being other than God. And religious disapproval of such relations, I should say, is not new. But politics, globalization, and digital modernity together have markedly intensified debates about appropriate practices. And given Pemba's long reputation as a center of Uganga, people comment actively on changes in healing practices in particular. As across the Islamic world, gaining ground as the sole legitimate treatment for afflictions caused by jinns is the practice of ruqya. The recitation of carefully chosen verses of the Quran to seek healing and protection, seeking refuge in God alone. Ruqya is, reformists argue, the only acceptable treatment for jinn trouble. The Prophet approved of it, and it was practiced in his time. Ruqya centers only the Quran, select hadith, and substances described in these, no magic books and no alternate remedies. And Ruqya forbids consensual relations with jinns. It is thus distinctly opposed to the Uganga, for which Pemba has historically been famous. In this jinn-rich context, Ruqya represents a serious shock. Proposing that Muslims' true heritage comes from the Quran and the Prophet's example, Ruqya practitioners contest and aim to eradicate another, also ancient heritage, a history of jinns and human interactions with them in a landscape that they share, a heritage that further has long been construed as quintessentially Pemban. Ruqya thus poses a wholly new challenge, not only to human heritage, but to the heritage of jinns themselves. In Ruqya, not only must humans reject relationships with jinns, non-Muslim or lapsed Muslim jinns must be converted or reconverted to Islam, for in practitioners' visions, no true Muslim would hurt another believer. If jinns refuse, practitioners of Ruqya can beat, burn, and even kill them. Several practitioners who spoke with me claimed to have killed resistant jinn, and they were known for it. But naturally, jinns are heartbroken by the murder of their kin, and they seek revenge. Many practitioners of Ruqya have suffered terrible fates at the hands of jinns, people say, angry because they have lost their children, brothers, cousins, parents, wives, husbands. The contest over appropriate relationships with jinns, whether one should turn to traditional Uganga or Ruqya for relief, is complex, and it plays out in the intimate realm of families as well as in the world of jinns. When a family has had long-standing involvement with jinns, how to treat this heritage is an increasingly vexed question, and jinns have a clear stake in the matter. The jinn problems I've described, of course, take place in a larger context where heritage, in UNESCO's sense and politically, is actually extremely vexed and has been so, especially since 1964. These contests about mystical inheritance, the older view positioned against revivalist hopes, of course, reflect tensions in wider Zanzibar about the history of the archipelago. And of course, I can't cover that here. But questions about what Zanzibar is, what parts of its heritage are to be protected, in fact, who its people are nothing if not political. I could reasonably end with a thought about the potential role of Islamic revival in Zanzibar's mystical and political future, something that could easily happen in my usual work and writing. But provoked by the call for papers for this workshop, and because I haven't thought of heritage in this way before, what I'd prefer to do is note instead the adjacent but perhaps valuable questions suggested to me by the paper on which this presentation draws. And these are, could rich soil and thriving forests in which people of all Zanzibar's classes and ancestries live constitute heritage to be protected? How could thinking through crumbling homes and new construction on mystically powerful grounds reorient discussions about heritage in Zanzibar? Could a standard of living that permits people agentive choice about their relation to the imaginal be considered heritage? Could competing ideas about humans' best relationships to unseen beings constitute a single field of a people's heritage? What rights might be accorded to jinns in these conversations? And what if the many non-human agents with whom human beings co-evolve, with and against whom we define ourselves and each other, also have heritage of their own? And what might humans owe them? So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Nathalie, also for great questions you posed on your way out. I think these are important questions for all of us to think about. Next, I'll invite Giovanna.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. My name is Giovanna Capponi. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Roehampton. Today, I'm going to Thank you very much to the organizers for this truly wonderful workshop. And today I would like to share with you some of the results of my last piece of research. I work mostly with Afro-Brazilian religions in Brazil, namely Candomblé and Umbanda. I will give just some context in here. I'm talking about a cluster and very heterogeneous cluster and set of ritual practices that originated in Western Central Africa and are now widespread in the diaspora in Brazil, but in different variations also in Cuba and other parts of South America. But my fieldwork was carried out in Brazil. And these religious practices revolve around the worship of the orishas, who are deities that are connected to elements in the landscape, but also human temperaments and different stages of life and matter. Today, I'm going to describe the social and environmental controversies involved in the Festa de Yemajá, the deity of the ocean, who receives a yearly celebration. So every year, normally in the Brazilian summer, between December and February, depending on regional variations. And this very popular event has been declared cultural heritage in different coastal areas of Brazil. However, the common ritual practices like delivering offerings and big baskets with perfumes and bracelets and all sorts of food offerings in the sea during the Festa de Yemajá have been raising concerns and questions of ethics and sustainability. Okay, yes. So this shift in attention towards what is considered more ecologically sustainable and biodegradable and compatible with the natural landscape is definitely part of a wider incorporation of contemporary ideas on the environment, conservation, and pollution. And as these topics gained relevance in the Brazilian social debate over the last decades, Afro-Brazilian religions started to rediscuss some of these widespread practices in light of the environmentalist discourses. These ritual transformations compel us to analyze the moral implications of matter, but also the ways in which heritage and tradition is reinterpreted in their approach to matter reality. So I carried out my fieldwork mostly in the area of Sao Paulo. So my last fieldwork was in December 2019. And some of these controversies take place in the public space, especially on the coastal area and coastal municipalities in the region of Sao Paulo. Afro-religious people gather, and a variety of offerings are prepared and left on the shores, on the public shores, according to the development of the rituals. So the offerings are generally composed of this big basket filled and adorned with fruit, flowers, but also symbols of vanity and femininity, since Yemajá is also a feminine deity of motherhood. So combs, perfume, jewelry, lipstick, bottles of champagne, etc. These presents are often prepared with gift wrapping, fine ribbons, and complemented with written inscriptions and requests in which the devotees ask for blessing, health, fortune, and love. And these baskets are then carried and delivered directly into the sea. Sometimes these baskets are replaced with boat-shaped polystyrene or wooden containers for their lightweight and ability to float for longer times. This kind of celebrations require organization at an administrative level. And Afro-religious federations pay fees and comply with bureaucratic regulations imposed by the municipality of the different coastal towns in order to be able to perform their ritual activity on the public shores. However, recently political debates, in recent political debates, this event has been criticized for polluting the water and the beach. In fact, this big religious festival produces large amount of trash that needs to be collected and taken away with big trucks by municipal waste management. Just a question here, can you see different slides coming in or not? Yes? They can't, I don't know what happened. Okay, I'll just go on. This load of ritual waste often includes plastic caps, plastic combs, broken polystyrene boats, bottles, and similar objects together with flowers, petals, and rotting food that are found laying on the shores. Some Afro-religious interlocutors, some of my interlocutors, argue that increased fees and regulations that are in place in these municipalities are a way of boycotting the event and restricting the access to the public space. And the critiques of polluting the environment often come from neo-Pentecostal local politicians. So while these actors acknowledge the importance of the individual responsibility in trying to make the event more sustainable, environmentally friendly, they also acknowledge the critique comes from religious and political opponents. Okay, I can't see slides coming in, so can you see me what you see? You can't see anything.
The last one we can see is the one with flowers on the kind of on the park area, I think.
Okay. I don't know why I can't. That's weird. I can't.
Would you like to stop sharing for a moment? And
yeah, I'm trying this. Yeah, my laptop is, anyways, okay, I'll just go on. The controversies around the Festa de Yemajá started to gain relevance in December 2015. That year, oh, now you can see something, I guess. Yes, it's working. So this, you can see in here are the offering with polystyrene boats. And sometimes, as you can see in here, there are plastic kits of presents for Yemajá that are delivered directly in the ocean, which is also one of the reasons they've been criticized. These controversies around the Festa de Yemajá started to gain relevance among Afro-religious communities in December 2015, because that year a very important and prominent religious authority, Maestela Dioshosi, one of the most prominent leader of a traditional terreiro, a traditional candomblé temple in Brazil, in Bahia, published an article in a local newspaper when she declared that she would no longer support the tradition of delivering presents for the deity Yemajá in the ocean. Of course, this thing encountered quite a lot of resistance, because Afro-religious people were not ready to apply such radical change to something that has been declared heritage, cultural heritage. However, for some interlocutors try to find a way in between. So probably you can't see these pictures because the sharing doesn't work. However, I had a slide with a picture of a Candomblé priest, Baba Rodrigo, who is in Rio de Janeiro, a young priest, who started waving baskets with leaves and biodegradable materials. So he started a workshop as a part of an environmental education project. This workshop is part of this environmental education and aims to teach Afro-religious practitioners to make sustainable and biodegradable offerings. Interestingly, this person is also a biologist as a master degree in biology. So he combines his academic understanding of the natural world with the religious knowledge. And what he says is that the aesthetic, what he says is that the knowledge of making things with biodegradable material comes from an African and authentic African heritage that needs to be reclaimed. So he's legitimizing this change while also drawing from the supposedly authentic African heritage, which clashes with the Baroque aesthetic of candomblé that you can see in the plastic kits, for example. However, as you can imagine, these changes and small changes are led by the younger generation of priests and priestesses. So they need to be negotiated vertically with their religious hierarchies, but they also need to be negotiated together with spiritual entities who have been used to receive offerings in a certain way. So, for example, sometimes gifts are delivered collectively, and sympathizers come and add these pieces and gifts and perfumes and bracelets to the offerings. And the younger practitioners, when no one looks, would go and take out excessive plastic so that to make it a bit more environmentally friendly. But in doing so, as entities and authorities would complain, they are also dismantling somehow the energy and the intentions and the vows that have been put into the preparation. So this is one of the things. And another axis of negotiation involves non-human animals. So, for example, some of these discourses have been around non-human animals that may feed on the ritual offerings when they are delivered. So one interlocutor told me, I'm not putting candies or sugary things in the offerings in the ocean because the fish won't eat it. So there's also an ecological understanding that is incorporated in this change and renegotiation. The last thing to conclude is that, of course, it's important to acknowledge, and that sort of resonates with Anberg's keynote yesterday, that really the most of the accusations of polluting the environment come from religious and political opponents, namely neo-Pentecostal churches and conservative political parties. And they are somehow embodied in the present government. And as we know, Brazil, so we're looking at the micro scale, but on the bigger scale, I mean, the scenario of all these little negotiations are contemporary Brazil. There has been scenario of incredible and sad corporation-driven environmental disasters. So it is important also to acknowledge the fact that all these accusations are a way somehow to downplay the role of these big actors and target religious and ethnic minorities. So that was all for me. I'm sorry the screen share didn't work properly. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Giovanna. Now to our final presentation in the panel, Vibha and Fouad. Yeah, over to you, but you might want to tell us in a sentence or two where you are based or something along those lines.
Hello, everybody. This is Vibha Galhotra. I'm a conceptual artist working and living out of Delhi, India. And Fouad, are you there?
I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, so Fouad is...
I'm a writer and independent researcher based in Johannesburg and Frankfurt. And we are going to present an experimental lecture performance.
So we will be presenting today along with my work, and the words are by Fouad. So he will be presenting. Yeah, thank you. And I'll be sharing the screen. Yeah.
Today's Utopia, tomorrow's waste, exploring how beliefs and spiritual dimensions of inequality turn today's realities of waste into future heritage and invisible monuments, a lecture performance. Trick number one, the center of the universe, naturalizing whiteness. If I am not the center of the universe, you do not exist. If I am not the central actor in the drama, I will not listen to you. I will not acknowledge your presence. I will remove myself from the situation. My absence will highlight my centrality to all actions. I will not acknowledge your presence. My ability not to see you is my power. If I do not see you, you do not exist. If you only exist at my will, you are nothing without my attention. I am, therefore, the one who controls who is real and who is not. Trick number two, building a world. All information is available to me. I don't need to take action. It is enough that I know about something wrong or to make others aware of it. I don't need to take up an issue and become active. My technological innovations have surpassed the corruptible body, and technical objects have turned into living beings. I have the right to invent machinery which extract energy and precious metal from the ground to pollute air, soil, and water for the higher cause of my creation. Trick number three, worshipping consumption and production of waste, the ideology of dematerialization. I worship the spirit of technological progress. I want humanity to move forward. I will follow the ritual it demands and will sacrifice everything on the altar for the infinite improvement of technology. I greet its increasing and suffocating production of waste and pollution as my religious ordinance. I accept that my ritual worship of production and consumption sends wares across the globe in one direction and waste in the other. I'm both the master and recipient of this ecstatic circle of eschatological culmination in destruction. I have the right to conjure up technological spirits which will inhabit waste and pollution as our invisible monument. I worship waste. Trick number four, the modification of organic nature. I own the world and carve out the optimal distribution of natural resources among my powerful peers. I am the master of nature. In spite of natural processes, I know what needs to be changed in the genetics of plants to yield more crop, in animals to grow more meat, and to modify insects to stop spreading diseases. Trick number 5, ownership and naming. I will use language to name and divide the land, to invent classes, structures, systems. I determine technologies that benefit the future of humanity. I will invent new skills and sciences, independent of the ontology of our bodies, independent of organisms in relationship with our existence. Instead, I will create invisible monsters that will inhabit and haunt this technology. They will call for us to extract oxygen from Mars so that machines possessed by spirits can colonize the planet. I will continue to plow the spiritual land of technologized futures as a dwelling ground for my invisible monsters. I will erect invisible monuments in language for them to dwell in and to be worshipped. This lecture performance is based on Latin American critical race scholar Ida Hurtado's 1999 paper, The Trickster's Play, Whiteness in the Subordination and Liberation Process. Our presentation quotes the first fable from this paper, The Center of the Universe, Naturalizing Whiteness, and we continued writing further tricks. Hurtado says about the trickster's play, and I quote, "Through the use of this fable, I hope to bypass the pitfalls of our genderized, sexualized, wholly racialized language to submit the dynamics of power to closer scrutiny," end of quote. We did not intend for our presentation to take this shape. We had planned to experiment with storytelling, questioning the realities of raised imaginations of an ecological catastrophe through a fictional dialogue with a future visitor alien. We had in mind to question the function of art and socio-political processes, using Vibha's ecofeminist work to discuss material realities of neoliberal capitalist consumptions. However, over the course of the past months, Vibha was confronted with the reality that not only the personal is political, as famously stated by Carol Haynish in 1970, but also how the political becomes personal. Since the submission of our abstract, the situation in India turned worse, not only due to the increased spread of COVID-19. In this experimental lecture performance, we want to make visible the anxieties and the feeling of helplessness that began in our discussions, documenting how words turned in our mouths as we speak. Not only that words can be embezzled, but also how they turn to waste. We began to ask ourselves questions which further challenged our collaboration. It made us revisit our performative lecture, asking, how can we speak about social justice while the disenfranchised face structures of exclusion imposed by neo-colonial administrations? How can we approach conceptualizations of heritage that are weaponized by neoliberal government, monumentalizing an imagined past? How can heritage turn language into toxic waste? Critical art discourse determines the value of artworks. According to Brian Holmes' text, The Liar's Poker, threats against environmental activists, journalists, and artists are to be addressed obliquely only in contemporary art discourse. The art market does not allow for space to openly address anxieties when friends and family struggle with access to public health services. To make this conflict visible, we decided to take up the challenge posed in the text, "The Pandemic is a Portal" by Arundhati Roy, which ends in the statement, "Nothing could be worse than a return to normality." We decided that to remain silent about the immediate context of our presentation would stand against Black, African, and Ecofeminist principles. In this lecture performance, artworks are presented in context of fables, modeled after critical race theorist practice. This presentation does not offer answers or a possible framing of critical approaches of the crisis it addresses, but rather could be seen as a documentation of a refusal to make sense, while also refusing to stay silent about social injustices. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very, very much for a wonderful lecture performance, as you call it, and thank you for experimenting here. It's really wonderful. Yeah, you have at least my mind flow. I don't know how everyone else went, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, welcome back everyone to this second half of day 2 of Heritage Out of Control. We will start with panel 4, Sensing Heritage. And we have again 4 presentations of each 10 minutes. And so there's the slide change in order. We start with Patrick Eisenlohr from the Center of Modern Indian Studies and Georg August University of Göttingen, which will be followed by Eva Ambos from the University of Tübingen, then Mariam Goshatze from Leipzig University, and the 4th presentation will be by Eski Güner and Esra Özürek from University of Cambridge and University of Illinois. And the discussant of this panel is Serawit. So let's start.
Yes, good. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Okay. Well, Serawit, Cicek, and Annika, thanks very much for organizing this wonderful conference and for inviting me. Thanks for everybody for being able to, thanks to everybody for being able to join this very exciting conversation. So in this, in this contribution, I raised the issue, like probably all the presenters on this panel, of what does heritage feel like, and more specifically, what can atmospheres be heritage or be part of heritage? So, because when we work with the materialities of heritage, we often focus on the things and objects and built environments. But what about the ecstasies of such things, such as the atmospheres as material, energetic, and spatial phenomena that emanate from such things and through which things affect us? Such atmospheres, I would say, are often intertwined with discourses around heritage, such as those of the relevance or non-relevance of groups X or Y. But because atmospheres operate primarily non-discursively and evade full discursive capture, they can also be transgressive of discursive boundaries and therefore out of control. Here I'm talking about my research among 12 Ash'i Muslims in the mega city of Mumbai, and who are actually a beleaguered minority within the Muslim minority of Mumbai and in India at large. And they're kind of stuck between a prominent past and a marginal present. Shia Muslim trader communities played a prominent role when 19th century Bombay became the imperial hub of the Indian Ocean. And 12 Ash'is left salient architectural heritage in Dongri, the south central neighborhood, very congested place, which is the center of Mumbai 12 Ash'i life in the city, such as the splendid Mughal Masjid, built by Iranian traders in the 1860s. Nowadays, however, the great majority of Mumbai 12 Ash'is are poor and marginal migrants from North India and their descendants. and struggle to claim a right to the city in which traders of their sect once played a prominent role. While there's a network of 12 Vichy built heritage in near Dongri, consisting mosques, imambaras, and the buildings of charitable trusts, I want to draw attention to the energetic and atmospheric dimensions of heritage that recurring 12 Shi'i ritual events and processions emanate in the city. Sonic and other atmospheric dimensions of ritual practices in the city's public places also contribute to making particular neighborhoods Shia by appealing to felt aspects of belonging, connecting them to a more distinguished past. And the most notable of these public ritual processions are the spectacular annual commemorations of the Battle of Karbala, the traumatic event of Shiism that were until the turn of the 20th century, the single largest religious processions in the city. And Bombay or Mumbai has a long history of religious processions as means to, as very contested, sometimes violent means of posing claims to the city, often in ethno-religious communal terms. Now, such atmospheric practices do not just perpetuate a particular religious tradition, but also support claims of established residence and historical importance in Mumbai of a community in a precarious position. And Shi'i Muslims produce these atmospheres of a prominent Shi'i past, spilling into urban space in situations of tense sharing in the face of very powerful and often superior counterclaims over the city by both Hindu nationalists and the Sunni majority among Muslims. Now, there has been much discussion about the materiality of heritage and the problematic nature of the institutionalized distinction between tangible and intangible heritage. And the atmospheric aspects of heritage, I think, are interesting because they are irreducibly material, but also cut right across this distinction. Their materiality as energetic forces is different from that of objects and things. Atmospheres are no objects or things, but when they intermingle with and affect bodies, they are also tangible in a rather literal and pronounced ways. And the neo-phenomenological philosopher Hermann Schmitz, who actually passed away 13 days ago, has characterized atmospheres as half things or Halbdinge, that in contrast to things are fleeting, they have no fixed locations in space, they come and go, can appear and reappear, and they can be interrupted in their duration, such as wind, pain, voices, or musical figures. And atmospheres can be understood as feelings and emotions that spread and extend in space, intermingling with and enveloping sentient bodies, like darkness or cold does. Perspective on atmospheres as spatially extended emotions is not just a departure from the notion of emotions as a matter of subjectivist interiority, because as emotions, atmospheres are literally out there, but also complicates discussions of the materiality of heritage, because the latter comprises the usual focus on objects and things in the built environment, but also it's much less frequently explored energetic ecstasies, such as in the sonic or other forces that impinge on sentient bodies. So therefore, I mean, atmospheric half things are, I think, a dimension of heritage in its own right. Often the atmospheric distinct dimensions of heritage are purposefully created and manufactured. And one of the main contributors, one of the main contributions of the second neo-phenomenological philosopher who's known for theorizing atmospheres, Gernot Böhme, is actually the analysis of the targeted production of atmospheres through design and architecture. This is actually one of the reasons why his work has been widely taken up in geography and urban studies. However, atmospheres, even if purposely manufactured, like during religious rituals or processions, often also exceed control and direction. So on one hand, they can act as overwhelming forces, overriding individual agency intentionality through bodily seizure. They are difficult to spatially contain, indeed, as emotions poured out into space, in German, räumlich ergossene Gefühle, as Schmitz has put it, they often overshoot intended boundaries. On the other hand, they can also act in a contrary fashion to other established boundaries. such as discursively established boundaries of citizenship and belonging, including their spatial aspects. And this is actually extremely relevant in the context I'm talking about. And this spinning beyond the control of discursive hegemonies is what my example from Mumbai actually addresses, while 12 Ashi traders entertain memories of their former prominence in the city, to which a few architectural landmarks such as the Mughal Masjid attest. Muslims in post-colonial and post-partition India have progressively been marginalized, which is also the case for Muslims in Mumbai, which saw large-scale pogrom-like violence by Hindu nationalists against Muslims in 1992, 1993, redrawing the map of the city, resulting in further marginalization, especially ghettoization of the Muslim minority. And against the rise of Hindu nationalist power in Mumbai and in India at large, the Muslim minority's full citizenship and belonging in India is often put into question. As 12 Ashi Muslims are in many ways doubly marginalized as a minority within a minority, where sectarianism and among the Sunni majority anti-Shi'i sentiments have also been on the rise. So I was actually initially surprised during my fieldwork when my 12 Ashi interlocutors, when I found out that their main other were actually radical Sunnis who had radical anti-Shi'i views, right? And not the Hindu nationalist other, as I would have thought from reading the literature about communalism in India. So 12 Ashi public ritual practices, especially the large processions in the Islamic month of Muharram, are a way of giving the south central neighborhood of Dongri a half of 12 Ashi life, but it's also very diverse neighborhood that is shared with numerous others, is specifically Shi'i character and feel. And specific atmospheric aspects of such ritual practices that are responsible for giving Dongri a Shi'i feel, an empowering feel of a right to the city that is at odds with conventional citizenship discourse and communal boundaries of the city, and that often evades capture through discourse. Now, atmospheres as spatially extended emotions become palpable and powerful through suggestions of movement or motion, in which the felt quality of the atmosphere and the feeling of having a body become one and the same. And the result is a pre-discursive yet highly meaningful somatic experience that provides a source for alternative evidence, yet highly meaningful somatic experience that provides a source for that is alternative and it provides evidence and certainty compared to the conventional discourses of belonging in the city. And it's as such, in its sheer experience facticity, it's also largely immune to discursive critique. And suggestion of motion are multisensorial and holistic phenomenon. And so sonic phenomenon practices in turn are one of their most obvious exemplifications. The sonic as traveling kinetic energy is already multimodal, extending across the audible, touch, and kinesthetics. So this is actually very important. It's not just about sound and hearing and auditory culture, but it's actually, the sonic is actually comprise a broad spectrum, only part of which is audible. But it also is a larger vibrational phenomenon that can be sensed with the entire body, not just the auditory apparatus. Now, so this is actually about a particular aesthetic experience as heritage, and is involving a claim to belong and having a claim to the city. And the sonic dimensions of Shi'i ritual practices are what are they? They're in the rhythmic chanting of pious slogans, the amplified recitation of mournful Urdu poetry in dirges in memory of the martyrs of Karbala, the drumming during the procession, as well as the sounds of the very specific special sounds of chains and the sharp blades hitting each other, as well as the human bodies during the spectacular bloody acts of self-flagellation in the midst of crowds. These powerful sonic sensations that are intermingled with and exert suggestion of motion on those exposed to them flow together with the observable dynamic movement of bodies and ritual objects through the streets. And participants in the procession mostly wear black clothes and carry an array of Shi'i ritual objects invoking memories of the tragedy of Karbala, such as the tall battle standards, the alarm, the signs of the family of the Prophet, often with blood-stained shrouds fastened to them, as well as highly decorated replicas of the tomb of Hussein, the Tazi or Tabut. In some locations, scenes of the battle are even restaged in a manner resembling passion plays. So the result is a complex layering of emotion that can achieve its territorializing aim, investing certain neighborhoods of the city with a Shi'i feel in the face of powerful counterclaims through itineraries and movements. And just to sum this up, Shi'i atmospheric heritage in Mumbai operates via the experience and bodily sensation of movement on multiple scales. They range on a continuum from the subtle sonic suggestions of motion via the observable movement of people and objects through the street during the Muharram processions to the trans-regional movement of people in circuits of migration and pilgrimage, jointly producing these atmospheric aspects of 12 Shi'i heritage in Mumbai. And they're especially important in a situation where the hegemonic discourse of citizenship and communal boundaries marginalize 12 Shi'is, and where many Indian Muslims and Muslims alike contest and deny the past prominence of 12 Shi'is along with their citizenship and right to the city. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Mariam. I'm a research fellow currently based in the Multiple Secularities Project affiliated with Leipzig University. Thank you so much for organizing this amazing workshop. I've truly enjoyed being part of it. And without further ado, I guess I'll start since we're short of time. In 2009, Ghana celebrated its 52nd birthday as an independent country with the usual pomp and circumstance. Following the established practice, the parade was held at the Black Star Square in Accra. As usual, the freshly elected president of the country, John Atta Mills, arrived in a luxury vehicle amidst the cheers of the supporters. What was surely not usual about the festivities is the manner in which the opening prayers transpired. Prayers have inaugurated every Independence Day celebration since 1957, when Ghana celebrated its first year as a free state. In the spirit of unity and tolerance, ritual specialists representing the country's main religions, African traditional religions, Christianity and Islam, were present for the occasion. At least that used to be the case until 2009, when without much prior notice or preparation, African prayer was conspicuously removed from the program. The responsible party behind the initiative was the president himself, who evidently felt that the traditional prayer was offensive to his Pentecostal and charismatic persuasion. The term African traditional prayer refers to the act of pouring libation, customarily a bottle of gin, accompanied by invocations uttered by a ritual specialist. The framing of libation pouring as a form of prayer was popularized in the mid-20th century, when efforts were invested in forging a post-colonial image of Africanness to be promoted on national and international scales. In Ghana, libation was sewn into the country's national fabric via the first president, Kwame Nkrumah's culturalization program, which entailed piecing together cultural elements representing distinct communities to boost the sense of a common national identity. Thereby, African traditional prayer was made into heritage and came to be proudly displayed at national functions alongside Muslim and Christian prayers to betoken Ghana's rich spiritual and cultural legacy. The use of the word prayer in reference to the exercise corresponds also to the concurrent academic debates and reflects an aspiration to bring African traditional religions into a conversation with Christianity and Islam. The world religions paradigm utilized by African-born and foreign theologians and scholars in the process of quote unquote translating African traditional religions for a broader audience meant relying on the Western ideal of religiosity, giving prominence to attributes like the supreme being or prayer. The libation controversy, which I'll be talking about, is gripping since it is the only instance when African traditional religions or attributes thereof were presented as part of religious rather than cultural heritage to accommodate the message of multi-religiosity that the Independence Day prayer sought to convey. It is this outwardly religious association, I argue, that rendered the Independence Day libation especially vulnerable to attacks from Christians. Indeed, the practice was met with considerable resistance from Christian worshippers since its early days, yet it continued to be observed until the mentioned incident in 2009. The decision to remove libation from Independence Day celebrations was informed by the Pentecostal charismatic conception of African religion as the domain of the devil in theological terms and as a backward in modernist evolutionary terms. Despite the Independence Day prohibition, libations continued to prominently figure in celebrations that were described as cultural. We might, for instance, consider annual festivals of African traditional religions, which have been observed unhindered throughout Ghana. In fact, since the 1990s, the National Commission on Culture has been actively involved in the popularization of these cultural events, investing significant resources and manpower in promoting their visibility. Libations, along with other observances performed by ritual specialists, are an inseparable component of the festivals that are being protected by the state. Even though Pentecostal charismatic Christians, who are notorious for their condemnation of everything traditional and by extension cultural, continue to denounce these practices, their criticism is usually met with a claim that it is important to cherish culture within this cultural context. One thing is clear: wherever it is performed, conventionally, the aim of the libation is to invoke the presence of divine beings and ancestral shades to solicit protection and blessings. So the special antagonism reserved for the pouring of libation at the Independence Day celebration can be explained by the pointedly religious connotations of the act in the context. The model of political secularity operating in Ghana builds on the European paradigm of secularization, which is infused with Christocentric imagery and discourse. A combination of missionary teachings and colonial taxonomy of religions solidified these connotations, generating an apparition of modernity in contemporary Ghana, where Christianity and secularity coalesce. So while discursively, Western secularity has aspired to disentangle the public/secular identity from the private/Christian identity, in Ghanaian secularity, modern Christian and secular identifications overlap in the public discourse. The tremendous popularity of Pentecostal charismatic Christianity in Ghana since the late 20th century further corroborated these associations, contributing to the depreciation of African traditional religions as backward or obsolete. Culturalized renditions of the traditional life world have been preserved in the national heritage context. Yet the same treatment is challenging against the backdrop of the Independence Day celebrations. Here, the foremost purpose of the libation is to celebrate Ghana's three main religions rather than its three cultures. As a widely publicized event, the Independence Day celebration also serves as an occasion for communicating Ghana's strides into modernity, which in light of the country's Christocentric secularity implicitly demands, if not embracing Christianity, at least breaking away from African traditional religions. The result is a scripturally informed template of public morality in which the invocation of deities and ancestors as part of the libation is a moral transgression when it's performed on a national scale and needs to be expunged from public view. As soon as the spiritual dimensions of the libation become undeniable, the desire of Christians to contain its polluting effects overpowers the judicially secular ideals of the Ghanaian constitution. Public discourse, as observed in online and printed media, consolidates these conclusions. For one, many of those who applauded President Atamil's ban on libation advanced theological arguments, extensively quoting from the Bible. Among others, we find references to Exodus 20, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me, and Deuteronomy 18:10, let no one be found among you who practices divination or sorcery or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does this is detestable to the Lord. A less existential, yet still an intrinsically moral argument concerns the use of alcohol in libation pouring, a substance deemed sinful by Pentecostal charismatic Christians, and the presence of traditional deities at the Independence Day celebration has been deemed inappropriate by some politicians as well, since the deities were presented to be drunk. You might ask why the Christocentric narrative of modernity does not clash with the constitutionally reinforced ideal type of secularity that stresses interfaith tolerance and freedom of religion. A few intellectuals and public figures did approach the controversy from a secularist perspective, insisting that President Atamils had no right to foist his line of belief on other people's private affairs, or criticizing the prohibition as a clear case of religious intolerance. Interestingly, even these secularists engaged in considerable discourse hopping, often combining the freedom of religion stance with either a vindication of the libation as a cultural practice or with a theological justification. For example, claiming that a libation is not unchristian per se, since its goal is to connect with the exact same deity or God. I will finish with the reaction of the practitioners of African traditional religions to the libation debate. If in other contexts, the defense against Christian attacks is grounded in a skillful combination of heritage discourse and an emphasis on the right to culture guaranteed by customary law, in this case, the defense was rarely formulated in constitutional terms. Instead, advocates of libation endeavored to boost the credibility of African traditional religions by arguing that it existed on the same ontological plane as Christianity. In these formulations, ancestors are completely removed from the discussion, and instead the presence of libation in the Old Testament is spotlighted as a sign of legitimacy. Quote, Jacob poured libation, and then Moses was also commanded by God to pour strong wine in the Holy of Holies, end quote. This is how a prominent God priest justified the shunned practice at a public conference. To conclude, the case is interesting since it speaks to the fluidity of the concepts and categories involved in the demarcation of cultural or religious heritage, demonstrating how culture, custom, and religion converge, dissociate, or overlap depending on the socio-political context within which they operate. And that would be it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Yeah, so we already arrived at the last presentation, and I see Eski and Esra arrive. So yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Annika, Serawit, and Çiçek for organizing this workshop and including us, and also for accommodating my time conflict. I will be presenting part of our paper we are co-authoring with Esra Özyürek, who is also with us today. In this paper, we are thinking together about the official discourses that commemorate the Holocaust and Atlantic slavery in Turkey in order to analyze the racialized moral regime of neo-Ottomanism that guides the contemporary government's international and national policy. What is common to the invocation of these two historical events in Turkish politics is the triangulation of Western cruelty, Ottoman innocence, and heroic protectionism of the suffering racial other. Both the enslavement of Black Africans and the genocide of European Jews serve as historical points of reference to claim that racist violence did not occur in the Ottoman Empire and that Ottoman Turkish morality poses a radically different example to that of racist European modernity. A narrative of Ottoman and Turkish protection of Jews based on partial truths is mobilized in order to deny the Armenian genocide, while commemoration of Atlantic slavery goes hand in hand with the forgetting of the Ottoman slavery. We call this process heritage making through negation, in which Ottoman moral heritage is reclaimed through a historical representation of European culpability, Jewish and Black African suffering, and eternal Turkish protectionism in return for gratitude. It is not a coincidence that the moral condemnation of the West is articulated through references to the Holocaust and Atlantic slavery in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests globally and the so-called refugee crisis in Europe. While anti-Semitism is situated within this racial moral regime as a foreshadow to the rising Islamophobia in Europe, invocations of transatlantic slave trade in Turkish politics externalizes anti-Black racism and all forms of racism, for that matter, to the Western civilization. By doing so, the narrative silences not only Ottoman slavery and the Armenian genocide, but also the grievances of Black citizens, immigrants, and religious and ethnic minorities in Turkey. Due to the time limitation, we will only focus on Ottoman heritage making through the commemoration of Atlantic slavery today. However, I would like to briefly summarize the section on the Holocaust remembrance in Turkey, about which you can learn more from Esra Özyürek during the Q&A. Turkey joined the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance as a full member in 2019. And in 2021, a website titled We Remember was published for the commemoration of the victims of the Holocaust and few other genocides, excluding the Armenian genocide. Studying the official discourses circulating through different media, we discuss how the Ottoman Empire and Turkey are portrayed as the savior and protector of Jews when Europeans persecuted them mercilessly. In this particular commemoration narrative, the paternalistic protectionism of the Ottomans and Turks towards Sephardic Jews since their expulsion from Spain in 1492 is reciprocated by exaggerated expressions of gratefulness by the Jewish minority in Turkey and the diaspora abroad. We argue that Jewish gratefulness and indebtedness become the proof of eternal benevolence throughout Ottoman past and Turkish present, hence heritage making through negation. Next, I will analyze the construction of European culpability and Ottoman innocence, African suffering, and Turkish protectionism in the context of Africa south of the Sahara. I will do so under the three rubrics of historical narration of Atlantic slavery in Turkey, restoration of Islamic heritage in the African continent, and finally, African prayers as a shield of Turkish national security. If the Holocaust remembrance went hand in hand with the forgetting of the Armenian genocide, the historical narration of Atlantic slavery in Turkish politics eclipses Ottoman slavery and feeds into a similar heritage of a just and noble imperial tradition. As the heirs of this tradition, Turkish Muslims today imagine having a historical responsibility towards the African Muslims, which is enacted through Islamic heritage protectionism on the continent. Turkey's politics of protectionism in Africa, either in the form of cultural heritage conservation or faith-based humanitarianism, is furthermore reciprocated by prayers, which in return provide Turkey with a spiritual shield of protection against internal and external security threats. In what follows, I will therefore unpack the racialized moral regime that governs responsibility and reciprocity between Turkish and African Muslims. Atlantic slavery entered Turkish political discourse through the increasing diplomatic ties between Turkey and sub-Saharan countries over the last decade. During his first diplomatic visit to Senegal in 2013, then the Prime Minister and his wife visited the Maison des Esclaves, the House of Slaves on the Gorée Island. Located near the coast of Dakar, the Gorée Island is a UNESCO designated World Heritage Site known as a major point of departure in the transatlantic slave export. Gazing through the famous door of no return facing the Atlantic Ocean, the visitors of House of Slaves learn about the captives' experiences of the Middle Passage. So did the Prime Minister of Turkey in 2013, and thus became the Gorée Island the new symbol of the Islamist critique of the West, as well as the national self-making in Turkey against the West. As the president discovered the history of transatlantic slave trade, the Gore Islands became the new symbol of the condemnation of the West and vindication of the Ottoman past in Africa. The Gore Islands symbolized the ruthless, remorseless, and immoral character of those who colonized Africa, said the president. They bought and sold humans like a commodity and threw the useless ones into the sea to be eaten by sharks. Against the backdrop of the West's shameful past in Africa, the president then whitewashed the Ottoman history on the continent. Quote, the history of Turkey's relations with Africa dates back to the 10th century. Thank God there is no single blemish in this over 1,000 years of past, nor there are places like the Gore Island where savagery and exploitation reached a peak. The act of commemorating the suffering of African slaves crossing the Atlantic Ocean silences, however, the suffering enslaved Africans endured along the land and sea routes leading to the Ottoman Sultan's army, harem, or individual households. Since the 16th century until the abolition of slavery in the late 19th century, over 1 million enslaved Africans were transported to the Ottoman Empire in slave caravans and boats under conditions that were no less painful than the Middle Passage. The historical narratives about European culpability, African suffering, and Ottoman innocence are furthermore transmitted to the young generations in Turkey through the symbolism of the Gore Island. At a 2018 rally in Kahramanmaraş, President Erdogan asked the mayor of the city to send the local youth to the Gore Island to see for themselves what an inhumane slave market was built and how devalued the human life was. Only then, the president added, we can appreciate how just, how noble, and how strong this nation is. Thus became the House of Slaves a platform for training the Turkish youth not only about the Western cruelty and African suffering, but first and foremost about the justice and nobility of their own ancestors. The youth's Senegal trip can thus be considered as heritage tourism, yet heritage by negation, not through revisiting ancestral memory, but through testifying for lack thereof. In providing the Turkish visitors with a glimpse into the Middle Passage, the door of no return functioned as a mirror that reflected the nation's own history, or rather, as a door of pride. Highlighted against the legacy of Atlantic slavery in West Africa, the legacy of Ottoman Islamic civilization is imagined to come with certain historical responsibilities. This responsibility is clearly stated by one of the youth. As the people of Kahramanmaraş, we came to look after the African people again, he said. On the Gore Island, looking after Muslims in need takes the form of Islamic heritage protectionism. In addition to the House of Slaves, the youth of Kahramanmaraş visited the only mosque on the Gore Island, which has been receiving media coverage in Turkey for the last 3 years. According to this news, the Imam, the mayor of Gore, and the Muslim community of the island have been reaching out and making a plea to the Turkish authorities to look after their mosque. If Islamic heritage protectionism is imagined to be the responsibility of the heirs of the Ottoman Empire, the responsibility of the protected is to pray for the protector. African prayers in return for Turkish protectionism function as a spiritual shield of national security. Many have argued that Turkey survived recent crises such as the 2013 Gezi protests, 2016 coup attempt, and Turkish military intervention in Syria, thanks to the spiritual shielding of African prayers. In this complex regime of mutual responsibility and protection, in which the protector's generosity is reciprocated with prayers that protect the Turkish nation from its internal and external enemies. If Jewish gratefulness takes the form of international lobbying for Turkey, which we didn't have time to discuss, African gratefulness takes the form of prayers. To conclude, it is not a coincidence that the enslavement of Africans has come to symbolize European culpability lately. As the movement for Black lives gained power globally, denying anti-Black racism in the past and present of Turkey has become an urgent political task. Atlantic slavery was a timely discovery to do just that. Reclaiming the status of savior and protector vis-à-vis Jews suffering under European persecution accomplishes a similar political task. memories of genocide and enslavement elsewhere, invoke ancestral pride here by silencing Armenian genocide and Ottoman slavery. The invocation of both Atlantic slavery and the Holocaust in Turkey is therefore a process of heritage making through negation. By mapping out the complex relations of responsibility and reciprocity between the Ottoman-descended Turkish self and the Jewish and Black African others, our discussion today shed new light on neo-Ottomanism as a racialized moral regime. Thank you.